The sovereign ceremoniously declared his immense pride in manufacturing a new Prince of Wales, smugly predicting that with Catherine at his helm, this photogenic duo would graciously steer national discourse toward the unwashed masses. The king has effectively orchestrated a bloodless coup, swiping the crown from Camilla's grasp and tossing it to Catherine while the world watched in stunned silence. Whispers from the gilded corridors confirm that the Princess of Wales has been weaponized with a level of authority that left the current Queen Consort utterly blindsided. Camilla's final, desperate ultimatum was reportedly incinerated without a second thought. One is left to ponder what suicidal request could provoke such a categorical dismissal from the king's inner circle. Has the monarch stealthily bequeathed his wife's actual prestige to his daughter-in-law? To unravel the current administrative train wreck inside the palace walls, one merely needs to scrutinise the microscopic clauses drafted in mid-April 2005. The bitter truth remains that Camilla was never scheduled for the ultimate promotion. This was no classified state secret. It was a desperate, grovelling pact explicitly designed to prevent the British public from hurling rotten tomatoes during that remarkably bleak civil wedding, a dismal affair that the late monarch purposefully boycotted. The institutional propaganda firmly insisted she would permanently linger as a mere princess consort. The late Queen had begrudgingly suggested that once her eldest finally took the throne, the Duchess of Cornwall might be tolerated with the title of Queen Consort. This concession was born not out of modesty, but sheer institutional terror, given that a deceased princess commanded astronomically higher approval ratings than the adulterous duo combined. Naturally, that flimsy pledge evaporated the moment unapologetic ambition detected an opening. Following the late Queen's departure in mid-September 2022, Charles eagerly ascended the steps, callously dragging his second wife to the apex of the hierarchy. The original conciliatory agreement was incinerated like a compromising tax document, with courtiers immediately gaslighting the populace into believing this hostile takeover was the master plan all along. Despite enduring 35 years as the nation's supreme pantomime villain, she ultimately seized the jewelled headgear. Evidently, mere stubborn persistence within the firm guarantees that the rulebook will inevitably be doctored to maintain an illusion of tidy continuity. Yet, sporting the ultimate accessory did not prevent the Queen Consort from tap dancing on violently splintering ice. Staffers whispered that her newly minted office was systematically starved of oxygen, deliberately excluded from any high-level discourse regarding succession or the brand's long-term survival. Critical verdicts regarding philanthropic alignments bypassed her completely. She was granted the glittering nomenclature, yet the operational passwords to the kingdom remained entirely out of her grasp. The establishment was perfectly content to let her showcase the inherited diamonds, provided she kept her hands firmly off the steering wheel. Meanwhile, the heavily curated illusion of a warm camaraderie with Catherine was in reality a profoundly sterile, contractual obligation. The duo occupied vastly divergent stratospheres, exchanging icy pleasantries only when geographically trapped in the same drawing room. Their manufactured public warmth possessed all the authenticity of a heavily scripted daytime soap opera. They resembled adversarial envoys, forced into a diplomatic handshake. The moment the flashes ceased, the performative grins vanished and both retreated to their fortified bunkers. Beneath this frozen surface, the tectonic plates of authority were already shifting with lethal precision. Given their fundamental estrangement, it was inevitably merely a countdown until this icy chasm birthed a catastrophic power vacuum. Whilst the globe remained pathetically fixated on the Sussex's ceaseless stream of monetised grievances and streaming platforms, a far more lethal manoeuvre was quietly unfolding. The Princess of Wales had long ceased being a mere decorative ornament deployed for ribbon-slicing duties. She was ruthlessly constructing an unassailable fortress of influence that caught the old guard entirely unprepared. This was a chillingly calculated stratagem designed to render herself the sole, indispensable asset within the crumbling institution. She operated with ruthless, long-term foresight, whilst her relatives squabbled over trivial podcast analytics and publicly laundered their soiled linen. Her foray into early childhood development bypassed the customary, hollow royal patronages. Instead of merely masquerading as an important figurehead, she aggressively dragged legitimate neuroscientists and policymakers into the royal orbit. This constituted an aggressive infiltration into substantive policy arenas, securing her a chair at tables where a mere tiara offers zero currency. By wielding empirical data, rather than relying on insipid photo opportunities, she morphed into the most terrifyingly competent operator in the palace, a reality even the reigning monarch could no longer disregard. Then, late January 2024 delivered a catastrophic medical bombshell that utterly obliterated the establishment's standard operating procedures. The Princess of Wales broadcasted her survival of a major surgical procedure in the capital, noting with clinical detachment that her condition was initially and incorrectly presumed to be benign. The revelation detonated with nuclear force, shattering the customary veneer of polite, rehearsed public sympathy. The ensuing global reaction was violently authentic, triggering a raw, unmanaged grief that hadn't been witnessed since the tragedy exactly 30 years ago. We have reports from Paris. The Diana, Princess of Wales, has been killed in a car accident. The masses wept and constructed spontaneous floral barricades at Kensington Palace without needing any manufactured prompting from PR executives. This visceral outpouring stemmed from a disturbing anomaly. The populace actually favoured her, a staggering achievement for an institution largely resembling an outdated wax museum. Her stoic navigation of the ordeal cemented her supremacy not just amongst the peasants, but within the fiercely guarded corridors of power. By maintaining a chilling composure, isolating her offspring from the media circus, and refusing to rush her return, she played an absolute masterclass in crisis management. Come November 2024, the monarch, simultaneously battling his own grim diagnosis, was forced into a brutal reckoning regarding his legacy. He ruthlessly calculated which family member possessed both the public mandate and the titanium backbone required to keep the firm from complete collapse. Evidently, navigating a personal apocalypse with impeccable grace is the ultimate catalyst for an institutional promotion. When evaluating who possessed the fortitude to drag the crown through inevitable future catastrophes, the internal consensus overwhelmingly crowned Catherine as the sole viable asset. The Queen Consort abruptly detected the sickening drop in atmospheric pressure. There was no theatrical screaming match, merely a lethal, silent recalibration of loyalties. Courtiers magically evaporated from her antechamber, and highly sensitive inquiries were suddenly rerouted to a decidedly younger desk. Whilst Camilla desperately attempted to anchor herself, the entire royal apparatus was already physically migrating away from her orbit. This systematic stripping of relevance hinted at the inauguration of a merciless, total transfer of sovereignty. By May 2025, the hushed palace paranoia had mutated into glaring international headlines exposing a catastrophic structural purge. The sovereign was overtly offloading the substantive burdens of the crown from his spouse directly onto his heir's wife. This was no trivial swapping of meaningless ribbon-cutting ceremonies. It was a surgical strike designed to amputate Camilla's institutional clout. Seasoned royal analysts recognised the terrifying permanence of the move. This was not a temporary sabbatical, but an irreversible, humiliating demotion. The monarch was essentially rearranging the hierarchy, and his wife's seat was being unceremoniously shoved into the obscure corners of the room. The most brutal facet of this bloodless assassination was the weaponization of royal patronages. These affiliations are not mere pastimes. They are the sole justification for a royal's existence, operating exactly like lucrative shares in a cutthroat family corporation. The most prestigious portfolios, encompassing healthcare and the arts, were ruthlessly hijacked from Camilla and deposited into Catherine's lap. This represented the callous deletion of 35 years of painstakingly curated goodwill. The institution essentially wiped the Queen Consort's hard drive and handed the administrative rights to her daughter-in-law. Adding insult to profound injury, a secondary, far more dangerous shift in security clearance occurred. Historically, the Princess of Wales was barricaded behind rigid bureaucratic firewalls, deliberately isolated from the sovereign's apex advisors. Suddenly, those ironclad doors swung open, granting Catherine unbridled access to ultra-classified, strategic discourse that was once the absolute monopoly of the king and his wife. The impenetrable circle of influence surrounding the throne warped entirely, extending its tendrils exclusively towards the Waleses. Any veteran spectator of palace blood sports understood the chilling implications immediately. The sovereign was blatantly weaponizing Catherine as the reigning authority of the present, not merely an insurance policy for the future. Naturally, the grey suits at Buckingham Palace refused to confirm a single syllable of this hostile takeover. The firm's PR machine operates purely on obfuscation. They certainly do not dispatch press releases to narrate their internal mutinies. There would be no public seminars to rationalise the brutal confiscation of the Queen Consort's life's work. The institution communicates through the muted, lethal vocabulary of bureaucratic action rather than public pronouncements. The cumulative pattern of these manoeuvres told a story that royal correspondents, who have spent decades deciphering this cryptic dialect, found increasingly impossible to dismiss as mere coincidence. According to insiders, Camilla was meticulously observing the slow-motion decay of her own influence. She was not merely sitting in passive observation. Beneath her hard-won, dignified exterior, a tactical retaliation was brewing. A reaction was inevitable, and when it finally surfaced, it was arguably the most pivotal decision she had made since her Windsor nuptials. This is where the royal mask finally fractured. Angela Levin, an observer who practically resides in the king's pockets, reports that Camilla finally reached her breaking point and demanded a contractual guarantee. She wasn't fishing for a sentimental birthday card. She allegedly wanted an ironclad legal document ensuring her rank, her remaining duties, and her status were untouchable. She sought a fortress of protection against Catherine's predatory ascent and the fickle tides of public opinion. It was the aristocratic equivalent of a mid-collapse prenup, delivered just as the family's foundations were beginning to splinter. Observers termed it an ultimatum gift-wrapped in etiquette, essentially holding a metaphorical blade to the monarch's jugular while calling it a request. Camilla craved a signed deed to prove her relevance survived. She didn't want a flimsy promise. She wanted her power enshrined in the rule book. But when she pressed for this security, the response was a frost-bitten no. It wasn't a shouting match in the corridors. It was a clinical, high society eviction. The king's handlers informed her that the firm must remain nimble. That is merely palace euphemism for abandoning the unpopular to follow whoever the plebeians actually adore. They argued that a written pact would hobble the institution when the next heir takes the reins or the public mood swings again. They had the audacity to frame this denial as an act of mercy for her own sake. It was the ultimate corporate execution, liquidating someone's ego while claiming it is for the health of the brand. The translation of this elegant rejection was stark no. The palace essentially informed her she could keep the shiny trinkets and her slot in the parade, but the actual power was dead. They refused to formalize her authority over the inner circle because a contract makes future betrayals far too difficult. They need the agility to claw back that power the instant it suits the narrative. A signed parchment is merely a pesky bureaucratic hurdle in a classic corporate downsizing. Those in her orbit claim she was absolutely incandescent with rage. Yet she did not resort to a tantrum. She utilized that lethal, simmering fury one only develops after being the most loathed individual in the country for 35 years. There were no unseemly public meltdowns or strategic leaks to damage the king. Instead, she retreated into a silence that was pointed, deafening, and sub-zero. While she brooded in the cold, the king was busy architecting a future that clearly viewed her as an optional extra. If the vision is anchored solely on William and Catherine, Camilla's long-term survival remains a giant question mark. Since his mid-September 2022 coronation, Charles has been obsessed with a skeletal, slimmed-down monarchy. He demands a smaller payroll, actual accountability, and a team that produces measurable results rather than just expensive atmosphere. This wasn't a speechwriter's flourish. It was a structural purge that is already tilting the axis of power. It is now painfully obvious who is staying in the frame and who is being politely ushered toward the emergency exit. In the sovereign's mind, the survival of the crown isn't about his wife. It's about the people who can keep the gears turning for another century. The spotlight has migrated entirely to the whaler seas. They alone possess the public's mandate and the psychological armour to navigate the modern abyss. Per the king's logic, they are the Goldilocks zone of royalty. Old enough for gravitas, young enough for relevance, and popular enough for currency. Major reports from The Guardian and The Times suggest Charles is now Catherine's executive mentor. He is reportedly proofreading her addresses, unlocking historically barred doors, and weaponizing her recovery to secure a win for the firm. He is grooming her like a CEO handles a hand-picked successor, liquidating his assets for the only individual capable of saving the business. Camilla, by contrast, is a jagged piece in this futuristic puzzle. She has earned a modicum of respect through sheer, stubborn survival. Against catastrophic odds, she mutated a hostile national narrative into a sort of grudging tolerance. Yet her age, her checkered past, and the unresolved debris of the Diana era ensure she remains a figure of the monarchy's present, never its future. She is a distinguished artifact of the now in a calculus that only cares about next. Charles has concluded that the future belongs to Catherine and the generation she represents. This leaves Camilla watching her relevance wither, with no mechanism to halt the decay. Beyond the boardroom politics, an ancient, spectral dynamic is at play. A phantom that never vacated the palace is now dictating the terms of the new era. It is a supreme historical irony that after decades of trying to outrun the past, the king is building his house around a woman who mirrors the very person the institution once tried so hard to break. The barrier between memory and authority is dissolving. If Diana's shadow still determines who the public trusts, then this shift is less about strategy and more about cosmic destiny. The story cannot be told without acknowledging the ghost in every room since the 3rd of September 1997. Princess Diana has been absent for exactly 30 years, gone longer than many of her modern disciples have even been alive. Yet her influence on Camilla's reputation remains more potent than any official protocol. In this house, Diana isn't a memory. She is the literal foundation. It is a cosmic jest that the woman the palace tried to bury is the one deciding where everyone else is permitted to stand. When Catherine's diagnosis leaked in late January 2024, the public went into a psychological meltdown. Observers compared the hysteria to the carnage of the 3rd of September 1997, which is as awkward as it is accurate. Princess Diana died following a car crash in Paris. Police confirmed the crash was fatal. This wasn't some manufactured sentimentality cooked up by PR ghouls in a boardroom. It was visceral. The masses felt a genuine tether to her because she spent years acting like a functional human being inside a gilded fishbowl. She lacked the stench of trying too hard, which is why the world felt they truly knew her. Now the planet is collectively convulsing because one of the few tolerable royals proved to be mortal. Camilla can annex every charity and title she likes, but the fundamental rot remains. She can haunt every state banquet and read every script provided, but it is futile. Public sentiment toward her is merely a polite, exhausted respect born of her longevity. It bears no resemblance to the cult-like obsession surrounding Catherine. No amount of high-priced PR or clever optics can manufacture genuine likability. It is culturally ingrained. Rumour has it that even Charles recognises the reality. The public simply isn't that into his wife. Tina Brown's work highlights how the institution remains haunted by the 90s. Every tactical move is a frantic reaction to the mess they created with Diana. They failed her, and the collective memory refuses to forgive. Now, Catherine arrives young, ostensibly honest, and prioritising her offspring over the firm. Facing her diagnosis with actual fortitude only intensified the public's adoration. Princess Kate made a shocking cancer announcement on Friday, revealing she had recently undergone abdominal surgery. She isn't attempting to impersonate Diana, but she radiates the same energy that forced people to care in the first place. It is a frequency the palace can't tune out, regardless of how hard they scrub the past. Diana's ghost is becoming an increasingly irritating squatter in the royal mind as time drags on. This isn't a conspiracy by the family to ruin Camilla. It's simply that the public never moved on. People have guarded these specific grievances and loyalties for decades. They were merely biding their time until a likeable avatar appeared to fill the vacuum. Now that she is here, Camilla is trapped in an eclipse she will never outrun, no matter how many ribbons she severs. Catherine has inadvertently colonised the void left by Diana, not through some Machiavellian blueprint, but by the sheer, inconvenient gravity of her own authentic likability. The crown now finds itself in a spectacular state of disarray as the curtain rises on the next act. Charles, despite his own monumental health crises, continues to jerk the institutional strings, frantically rearranging the rules of a game that is becoming increasingly loud and messy. For centuries, the firm has survived by whispering stability to the masses while secretly sabotaging anyone who threatens the facade from within. Historians observe with a cynical smirk that the British royals are the undisputed masters of the empty title manoeuvre, a tactical specialty. They excel at amputating a person's actual influence while leaving them with enough expensive jewellery to distract the peasants from their irrelevance. In this theatre of the absurd, Camilla is not facing an undignified eviction. She is merely being managed with clinical, corporate precision, a strategy perfected over centuries to ensure the machinery never stops grinding. This is no mere staff shuffle or a hollow PR stunt, but a glaring, neon declaration of where the monarchy is desperately fleeing for survival. The sovereign has effectively gambled the entire institutional legacy on the Princess of Wales, betting his last chips on her image. He has anointed her as the protagonist of the next chapter simply because he knows she is the only member of this wax museum that the public hasn't yet opted to scroll past. Since the royal spotlight is notoriously narrow, the Queen Consort is being unceremoniously nudged into the wings to make room. It is the ultimate corporate betrayal, trading in the aging spouse for the shiny, younger model who actually understands the modern algorithm. This shift is a cold-blooded calculation that was arguably several decades overdue in the eyes of the palace suits. The firm understands that their existence is entirely dependent on public whim, and the data is unequivocal. The masses trust William and Catherine while merely tolerating the rest. Charles is simply executing the survivalist math required for the crown to endure the harsh light of the modern age. This is not an act of familial affection or playing favourites. It is the ruthless logic of a CEO sacrificing his own wife to salvage a bankrupt family business, a move as old as the throne itself. Yet beneath the strategic polish, the reality of this purge is profoundly grotesque on a human scale. Camilla is not merely a wooden pawn to be sacrificed for a quick polling boost. She endured 35 years as the most reviled woman in the kingdom, bearing the brunt of a marital catastrophe she did not solely create. She weathered decades of national vitriol to finally earn a sliver of grudging respect, only to have her life's work erased because the marketing department preferred a more photogenic cover girl. After 35 years as the institutional villain, she finally secured the crown, only to be told it was being downsized for a newer model. This is a unique brand of corporate purgatory, prompting one to ask, is this strategic genius or the ultimate betrayal of the woman who survived the world's hatred for the king's sake? Indulge us with your cynical theories in the commentary section below. Ensure you like, distribute, and subscribe to remain informed of the next royal meltdown. Furthermore, select the subsequent broadcast on your display. It promises to be equally scandalous.